She didn't stumble. She didn't trip. Jessica Hartwell looked directly at the 6-year-old girl standing in the aisle, and she shoved her. Not accidentally, not gently. She put her hand against that little girl's shoulder and pushed her out of the way like she was moving a piece of luggage that had no business existing in her path. The child hit the armrest hard, her small body twisting sideways, her eyes filling with tears. She was too stunned to cry. And Jessica didn't even look back. She just kept walking, chin up heels, clicking like nothing had happened, like that little girl didn't matter at all. What Jessica Hartwell did not know in that moment was that those 4 words that little girl was about to whisper would change everything. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell so you never miss a story like this, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The morning had started quietly enough for Claire Brooks. She had packed Ava's pink backpack herself, tucking in the small stuffed rabbit that Ava called Benny, a travel pillow shaped like a cloud, and a little zip pouch of crayons, and a coloring book, because Ava could not sit still for more than 20 minutes without something to do with her hands. Claire had done all of this before, 5 in the morning, moving through the house with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had learned to get things done before the rest of the world woke up. She had learned that long ago. You get things done in the quiet hours before anyone can interrupt, before anyone can tell you that you're doing it wrong. Claire was 34 years old. She was tall, with deep brown skin and natural hair she kept pulled back when she was traveling, and she had a kind of calm about her that people sometimes mistook for coldness. It wasn't coldness, it was composure. It was the thing she had built over years of learning when to speak and when to wait, when to push and when to let the moment breathe. It was the armor she wore when she moved through spaces that were not always designed to make her feel welcome. Her daughter Ava was 6 years old and did not yet understand the need for armor. Ava moved through the world like she belonged in every room she walked into, which Claire both loved fiercely and prayed over quietly every single night. Ava had her father's eyes dark and steady, and her mother's mouth, which meant she was never at a loss for words. She wore her hair in 2 big puffs on either side of her head and had insisted on wearing her yellow dress that morning because yellow was her favorite color and she wanted to look nice on the plane. Claire had not argued. David Brooks, Claire's husband, had arranged the flight 3 weeks earlier. His company, a logistics and private aviation firm he had spent 11 years building from a single leased aircraft into a fleet of 12 operated several charter routes on the east and west coasts. The plane they were taking that morning, a Gulfstream G550, was one of the jets his company owned outright. He had sent Claire and Ava ahead to Los Angeles for the long weekend because he had a board meeting that afternoon he couldn't reschedule, and he planned to join them Friday evening. It was a simple arrangement, the kind of arrangement that was normal for their family, even if it still occasionally surprised Claire how easily the word normal had come to include private planes and company jets and a husband who owned things she once could not have imagined owning. She had not always lived this life. She wanted to be clear about that, even if only to herself. She had grown up in Baltimore in a row house with a mother who worked 2 jobs and a father who worked 1 and picked up weekend shifts when the bills ran tight. She had earned scholarships. She had worked. She had met David at 22 when he was still driving a used Honda Civic and dreaming out loud about his company to anyone who would listen. She had listened. She had believed him. And now here she was, walking her daughter down the steps of a private terminal at Teterboro Airport, watching Ava skip ahead toward the plane and feel that familiar, complicated mixture of gratitude and something heavier that she couldn't always name. The crew at the terminal had been warm and professional as they always were. Marcus, the lead flight attendant on this route, met them at the steps and greeted Ava by name, which made Ava glow with a pride so enormous it was almost funny. He helped Claire with the carry-on, showed Ava to her seat, and asked if she wanted orange juice or apple juice, which resulted in a 30-second deliberation that Marcus treated with complete seriousness. Claire smiled watching it. She sat down across from her daughter and let herself exhale. 4.5 hours. They would land by early afternoon. David would meet them Friday. Everything was fine. That was when the commotion started at the front of the plane. She heard the voice before she saw the woman. It was the kind of voice that carried without effort, not loud exactly, but projected the voice of someone accustomed to being listened to, someone who had never had to repeat herself in any room because rooms always went quiet when she spoke. There was an edge to it, sharp and certain, and even before the woman appeared in the cabin doorway, Claire felt something in her body tighten instinctively. "I specifically requested the left window seat," the voice said. "I told the ground coordinator when I booked, left side front section, single seat configuration. This is not that." Marcus's voice came back smooth and patient. "Ms. Hartwell, this aircraft has a fixed cabin layout. We don't have a single seat configuration on this particular model, but we can certainly make sure you have as much privacy as possible, and that is not what I was told." The voice was flat now, clipped. "What I was told and what I'm looking at are two entirely different things, and I would like to know who I need to speak to about that." "I completely understand your frustration," Marcus said. "I'd be happy to go over everything with you once we're settled. I'd like it addressed now." There was a pause. Claire didn't turn around. She focused on Ava, who had her coloring book open and was already pressing a blue crayon hard against a page with the focused intensity of a surgeon. Claire reached over and tucked a loose strand of hair back behind Ava's ear and said nothing. The woman entered the cabin. Her name, Claire would learn, was Jessica Hartwell. She was somewhere in her mid-40s, though she carried herself with the particular brittleness of someone who was fighting very hard against the idea of aging and winning by about half. She was blonde and thin and wearing white linen in a way that suggested she had never spilled anything on herself in her life. She had the kind of face that might have been beautiful once and was still striking, but there was something pinched about it now, something held too tight like a fist that had forgotten how to open. She looked around the cabin with the expression of someone who had ordered a steak and been brought a salad. Her eyes moved over the seats. They moved over Marcus. They moved over the two other passengers seated toward the back, a middle-aged couple Claire had exchanged small nods with when she boarded. And then her eyes moved over Claire and Ava, and they paused there for just a fraction of a second longer than anywhere else, and in that fraction of a second, Claire read the pause completely. She had been reading that pause her entire life. Jessica Hartwell moved toward the front section and took a seat on the right side of the aisle 2 rows ahead of Claire. She dropped her designer bag into the seat next to her with the decisive thud of someone staking territory. She did not thank Marcus when he offered to stow it. She simply looked at him and said, "Ice water, no lemon." Marcus nodded and said, "Absolutely," with no change in his tone, and Claire found herself thinking that Marcus was a much better person than she could guarantee she would be in his position. The plane began its pre-departure routine. The engines shifted. The crew moved through their checks. Ava colored her picture occasionally, holding it up to show Claire a detail she was proud of. Claire watched her daughter and felt the warmth of it. The simple, uncomplicated joy of watching a child be a child, and she let the sound of Jessica Hartwell's low, continued complaints about the cabin temperature drift into the background. They were in the air for about 40 minutes when Ava decided she needed to use the restroom. This was not a surprise. Ava had the bladder management of most 6-year-olds, which is to say, she had the timing instincts of someone who enjoyed creating mild chaos. Claire helped her climb out of her seat, reminded her to take her time and not lock the door too hard, because the latch stuck sometimes, and watched her walk up the narrow aisle toward the front of the plane. Ava moved carefully the way Claire had taught her, keeping to one side, holding the headrests lightly for balance as the plane shifted slightly in the air. She was almost to the front when Jessica Hartwell stood up. She stood up without looking. She stepped into the aisle without checking. And in that moment, in that narrow space between seats, Ava was directly in her path. There was room to pause. There was room to step back. There was room to look down at the small child in the yellow dress and simply wait 3 seconds for her to pass. Jessica did not pause. Jessica did not step back. Jessica looked at Ava the way you look at a revolving door that isn't moving fast enough, and she put her hand against Ava's shoulder and she pushed. Not hard enough to send her to the floor, but hard enough to make her stumble, hard enough that Ava's hip caught the armrest on the left side, hard enough that the coloring book Ava had brought with her because she wanted to show Marcus her picture fell out of her hands and landed on the floor. Hard enough that Ava made a sound, a small caught-off-guard sound, somewhere between a gasp and the beginning of a cry that she swallowed fast. Jessica stepped past her and continued toward the front. She did not look back. She did not say, "Excuse me." She did not say sorry. She did not say anything. She simply walked forward, and Ava stood in the aisle holding her hip, blinking fast, looking down at her coloring book on the floor, and the only sound in that entire cabin was the low hum of the engines. Claire was out of her seat before she had consciously decided to stand. She covered the distance between her seat and Ava in 4 steps. She crouched down to Ava's level, checked her face, checked her hip, ran her hands quickly over her daughter's arms, the way mothers do, the instinctive assessment, the silent inventory. Ava's chin was trembling. Her eyes were bright. She was working very hard not to cry in front of strangers. And the fact that she was working that hard at 6 years old made something in Claire's chest hurt, in a way that had nothing to do with the present moment and everything to do with all the moments before it and all the moments yet to come. "Baby, you okay?" Claire said quietly. Ava nodded. Then she shook her head. Then she nodded again, which meant she was not okay, but she was deciding to be. Claire picked up the coloring book. She handed it back to Ava. She stood up, and then she turned toward the front of the plane. Jessica had stopped at the galley area near the front, talking to no one, simply standing there looking at her phone. She looked up when she sensed Claire approaching. Her expression did not change. There was no guilt in it. There was no awareness that anything unusual had occurred. There was only the faint trace of irritation that seemed to be her resting state. "Excuse me," Claire said. Her voice was even, completely even. "I need you to apologize to my daughter." Jessica looked at her. She looked past Claire toward Ava, who was still standing in the aisle holding her coloring book. Then she looked back at Claire. "She was standing in the middle of the aisle," Jessica said. "She is 6 years old," Claire said, "and you shoved her." "I didn't shove anyone." Jessica's voice was bored. "I moved past someone who was blocking the way. You put your hand on my child and pushed her into an armrest. Then perhaps your child shouldn't stand in the middle of a walkway." Claire took one breath, just one. "I am asking you to apologize to my daughter." Jessica tilted her head slightly. "And I'm telling you that I don't have anything to apologize for." There was a moment of silence. Not empty silence, loaded silence, the kind that has weight and texture and temperature. "What is your name?" Claire asked. Something crossed Jessica's face. A flicker of something. Not quite uncertainty. More like recalibration. "I beg your pardon. Your name. I'm asking for your name." "I don't see why that's relevant." "Then I'll ask the crew for the passenger manifest," Claire said, and she said it the way someone says something they are completely prepared to follow through on. Jessica made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "You're being incredibly dramatic about a very minor thing. A woman pushed my 6-year-old daughter and won't apologize. That's not dramatic. That's a fact. Look." And here Jessica's voice shifted. Not softer. Sharper, but differently sharp. The sharpness of someone who has decided to stop pretending they're not annoyed and start saying what they actually mean. "I don't know who you are or how you ended up on this flight, but some of us have places to be and things to deal with, and frankly, if your daughter cannot manage a narrow aisle without becoming an obstacle for other people, that is a parenting issue, not my responsibility." The word obstacle landed in the cabin the way a glass lands when it falls from a counter. You hear it, you feel it. Everyone goes still. From behind Claire, she heard one of the passengers in the back section make a quiet sound. Not a word, just a sound. The kind people make when they hear something they recognize as having gone too far. Claire did not look away from Jessica. "An obstacle," Claire repeated. "I didn't stutter. She is a child, a 6-year-old child. And I'm a grown adult who booked a seat on this aircraft and expects to be able to move around it without," Jessica gestured vaguely, "complications." Claire felt the heat rise in her. She felt it start somewhere low and move upward through her stomach into her chest, and she felt it the same way she always felt it, the same way she had felt it at 23 when her manager at the bank talked over her in meetings and never talked over the white women sitting next to her. The same way she felt it when she and David had gone to look at houses in Westchester, and the real estate agent had twice tried to steer them toward a different neighborhood than the one they had explicitly requested. The same way she felt it every time someone looked at her and made a calculation that had nothing to do with who she was and everything to do with what she looked like. She knew this heat. She had lived with this heat for 34 years, and she had spent those years learning how to use it without letting it use her. "People like you," Jessica said, and the words were quiet now, almost offhand, almost casual, which made them worse. "Always in the way, always making everything about themselves. I just want to get to Los Angeles." The cabin was completely silent. Even the engines seemed to hold their breath. Marcus had appeared at the edge of the galley. Claire saw him in her peripheral vision. He was standing very still. Claire turned around. She turned back toward her daughter. Ava had not moved from where she stood in the aisle. She was holding the coloring book against her chest like a shield. Her eyes were dry now. She had made a decision about the crying, the same decision Claire had watched her make a dozen times in her short life, the decision to hold it and process it and deal with it later. But her eyes were watching everything. They were watching her mother. They were watching Jessica. They were watching the passengers. They were reading the room the way 6-year-olds read rooms when they have learned that rooms can tell you a great deal about whether you are safe. And then Ava said it. She didn't shout it. She didn't announce it. She said it in a clear, matter-of-fact voice, the voice she used when she was correcting a misunderstanding, the voice she used when she had information that other people didn't have. And she felt it was only fair that they know. "My dad owns this plane." 4 words in a 6-year-old's voice. And they fell into that silence like a stone into still water, and the ripples went out and out and out, and every single person in that cabin felt them. Jessica Hartwell heard them. And for the first time since she had boarded that aircraft, the certainty on her face cracked. It was a small crack, barely visible, a slight narrowing of the eyes, a slight compression of the lips. The physical equivalent of a person doing a rapid mental calculation and finding that the numbers were not adding up the way they expected. She looked at the child. She looked at Claire. She looked at the child again. "What did you say?" Jessica asked. And Ava, still holding her coloring book against her chest, still standing in the aisle of a plane in the middle of the sky, met Jessica Hartwell's gaze with the steady composure of someone who had grown up watching her mother never flinch, and she said it again. "My dad owns this plane. His name is David Brooks, and I think you should say sorry to me." Nobody moved. Marcus, standing at the edge of the galley, had gone very still, in the way a person goes still when they are trying very hard to maintain a professional expression, and finding it requires significant effort. The couple in the back had stopped pretending to read. One of them had a phone in their hand, angled slightly the way phones get angled when people are recording things they think they might need a record of later. Jessica's mouth opened, and then it closed. And then she looked at Claire, and this time her look was different. This time there was something searching in it, something calculating the rapid rearrangement of someone who has just discovered that the room they thought they were in is not the room they are actually in. "Your husband," Jessica said slowly, "owns a Gulfstream G55O. Claire looked at her. "That is correct," Claire said. "David Brooks. You're welcome to Google him. We'll be landing in about 3.5 hours. Jessica Hartwell had a great deal of money. Claire knew this without knowing the details, the way you know certain things about certain people from the way they wear their clothes and carry their bags and speak to service workers. She had a father whose wealth was old, the kind of old that gets comfortable and starts to think it's permanent, and she had spent her life moving through the world with the assumption that money was the highest card you could play in any situation. It had served her well enough, Most situations had yielded. This one was not yielding. She looked at the child again, and whatever she was thinking in that moment, Claire could not read it completely, but she could see the shift happening, the recalculation, the adjustment, the careful, belated recognition that she had made an error in assessment. Jessica started. Yes, Claire said. And she waited. She was very good at waiting. Jessica looked around the cabin once quickly, and what she saw there was not helpful to her. She saw Marcus steady and professional, but no longer visibly inclined to run interference on her behalf. She saw the couple in the back with their phones. She saw a narrow aisle, and her own words still hanging in the air around her. All of them people like you, an obstacle and complications hanging there the way words do when they've been heard by more people than you intended. And she saw Ava, who was 6 years old, and who had said what she said not as a threat, not as a weapon, but as a simple statement of fact, with the clear eyes of a child who had not yet learned that truth is supposed to be complicated. Jessica stopped. Started again. The aisle is narrow, and I didn't see her, and that is not an apology, Claire said. The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room, and in that silence, 30,000 feet above the ground, something was about to change, not just on that plane, not just for those people in that cabin. Something was about to change in a way that would ripple outward in ways that none of them, not Claire, not Ava, not Jessica, and not the passengers quietly recording it, all could fully see yet from where they were standing, but Ava could feel it. She stood in the aisle of her father's plane, holding her coloring book, and she looked at the woman who had pushed her, and she did not look away. The silence that had settled over that cabin was not the comfortable kind. It was the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums and makes you aware of your own breathing. It was the kind that forces everyone in a room to decide in real time who they are and what they're willing to do about what they just witnessed. Jessica Hartwell was standing in that silence, and she was not handling it well. She had started to say something. She had started twice, actually. The first attempt had died somewhere between her throat and her lips. The second had come out as a partial sentence, something about the aisle being narrow, something about not seeing the child, and Claire had cut it off cleanly with 4 words. That is not an apology. And now Jessica was standing there with the full weight of the cabin's attention on her, and no script left to follow. I think, Marcus said, stepping forward from the galley with the measured calm of a man who had been trained for difficult situations, and was now deploying every bit of that training, that we should all take a moment and— I don't need a moment, Jessica said. Her voice had recovered some of its edge, but it was different now, thinner, like metal that has been heated and hasn't fully cooled. I need people to stop acting like I committed a crime. You put your hands on my daughter, Claire said. I bumped into her, in a narrow space, on a moving aircraft. You looked right at her and you pushed her. That is not what happened. There are people back there with phones who would disagree with you. That landed. Claire watched it land. She watched the way Jessica's eyes moved fast toward the back of the cabin where the couple was sitting, and she watched something shift in Jessica's expression. Not guilt, not yet, but awareness. The awareness of a person who has just realized that there is a record of this moment that exists outside her ability to edit it. You're recording me. Jessica directed this at the couple in the back, her voice climbing half a register. The man, who was somewhere in his 60s with silver hair and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, looked at her with the particular composure of someone who has long since stopped being impressed by women who use that tone of voice. I'm sitting in my seat, he said. What you do in front of me is not my fault. His wife nodded once firmly and said nothing which was somehow more powerful than anything she could have said. Jessica turned back to Claire. I want to be very clear, she said, and now her voice had shifted again into something more deliberate, more controlled, the voice of a woman who has been in difficult conversations before and knows that when emotion fails you, precision is your next weapon. I did not intentionally harm your daughter. I was moving through the aisle, and she was standing in it, and we made contact. That is the entirety of what occurred. She has a bruise on her hip, Claire said. Jessica stopped. That is not possible from a brief. Would you like to see it? The cabin went quiet again. Ava, who had been listening to every word of this exchange with the focused attention of a child who knows that important things are being decided about her, looked at her mother and then at Jessica and then back at her mother. She was still holding the coloring book. She hadn't moved from the spot in the aisle where she'd been standing when she said what she said about her father. She seemed to understand, with whatever instinct children have for these moments, that moving would mean something, and she wasn't ready to decide what yet. "Mama," Ava said quietly. Claire looked at her. "I'm right here, baby. Can I go to the bathroom now?" The question was so perfectly ordinary that it punctured the tension in the cabin like a pin into a balloon. The man in the back made a sound that was almost a laugh. His wife put her hand over her mouth. Marcus stepped forward. "Of course, sweetheart. I'll walk you up." He took Ava's hand gently and led her toward the front lavatory, and for a moment, the aisle was just an aisle again, and Ava was just a 6-year-old in a yellow dress going to the bathroom, and the world almost seemed manageable. But Claire kept her eyes on Jessica, and Jessica, to her credit, or perhaps just to her instinct for self-preservation, did not look away. "You said people like you," Claire said. Her voice was lower now, more deliberate. She was not going to let that go. She had decided that in the moment Jessica said it, and she was more decided now. "I want to know what you meant by that." Jessica's jaw tightened. "I meant people who make simple situations complicated." "That is not what you meant. You don't know what I meant. I have been on the receiving end of that phrase for my entire life," Claire said. "I know exactly what it means, and I know exactly how it was delivered. And I need you to understand that standing on my husband's aircraft and saying it to me in front of my daughter is not something I'm going to let pass." Something moved across Jessica's face, something complicated. She opened her mouth and then closed it again, and for a moment, just a moment, she looked like something other than what she had been presenting herself as. She looked tired. She looked like a woman who had been performing certainty for so long that she had forgotten what she actually felt underneath it. But the moment passed. "My father," Jessica said, "is Richard Hartwell." She said it the way people say things they believe are supposed to end conversations. Claire waited. "Hartwell Capital," Jessica continued. "I don't know if you follow finance, but—" "I know who Richard Hartwell is," Claire said. This seemed to surprise Jessica slightly. "Then you understand that I'm not someone who has to stand here and be lectured about—" "I understand," Claire said, "that your father has money. I also understand that you're standing on my husband's aircraft 30,000 feet in the air, trying to use your father's name to avoid apologizing to a 6-year-old. And I want you to think very carefully about how that looks." Jessica blinked. "Because there are phones back there," Claire continued, and her voice was calm, completely calm, the calm that comes not from indifference, but from absolute clarity. "And there are people watching, and everything you have said and done on this plane is part of a record that I will be keeping. And when we land, I will be speaking to my husband about every single detail of what happened here." "Is that a threat?" Jessica asked. "It's information," Claire said. "You're welcome to do with it what you like." There was a beat of silence, and then Marcus reappeared from the front of the cabin, Ava's hand in his, leading her back down the aisle. Ava was walking more confidently now. Whatever she had processed in the 3 minutes she'd been away from the situation, she had processed it well. She looked at Jessica as she passed, and she didn't look afraid. She looked, in fact, like someone who has decided to reserve judgment pending further evidence, which was an expression Claire recognized because she saw it in the mirror occasionally. Ava climbed back into her seat. She opened her coloring book. She picked up a yellow crayon, considered it, put it down, picked up orange instead. Marcus leaned toward Claire and said quietly enough for only her to hear, "Mrs. Brooks, I want you to know that I documented the incident as it occurred. Standard protocol. If you need anything from me, anything at all, I'm here." Claire looked at him. "Thank you, Marcus." He nodded and returned to the galley. Jessica had retreated to her seat. She sat down with the rigid posture of someone who is sitting down under protest, every line of her body communicating that this was a temporary position and not a surrender. She picked up her phone and stared at it, and the force of the stare suggested she was not reading anything on it, but was simply using it as a place to put her eyes. Claire sat back down across from Ava. For a few minutes there was only the sound of the engines and the soft scratch of Ava's crayon against paper. Then Ava said without looking up from her coloring, "She's not going to say sorry, is she?" It was not exactly a question. Claire looked at her daughter. "What makes you say that? Because she doesn't think she did anything wrong." Ava drew a careful orange line along the edge of a flower petal. "Some people don't. Grandma says that's the saddest kind of wrong there is, when somebody does something bad and they can't even see it." Claire looked at her daughter for a long moment. "Your grandma is a very wise woman," she said finally. Ava nodded like this was established fact and went back to coloring. But Claire was thinking. She was thinking about David. She was thinking about the phone in her bag and whether to call him now or wait until they landed, and she was thinking about the phrase, "people like you," and she was thinking about Ava's hip and the small sound Ava had made when she hit the armrest, and she was thinking about all of it together, turning it over, feeling the weight of it. She pulled out her phone. She opened a message to David. She typed, "Something happened on the plane. Everyone is fine. Ava is okay. But I need to tell you about it when we land." She stared at it for a moment, then added, "Actually, I think I need to tell you now." She pressed call. David picked up on the second ring. "Hey, you guys in the air!" "We're in the air." Claire's voice was steady. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to just listen before you react." There was a brief pause. When David spoke again, his voice had changed. "What happened?" She told him. She told him all of it, beginning with Jessica boarding the plane, the complaints, the entitlement, the collision, the push, Ava hitting the armrest, the non-apology, the word obstacle, the phrase, "people like you." She kept her voice even throughout. She reported it the way you report something when you have decided to be the kind of person who is clear and precise in moments of crisis, because clarity is power, and she was not going to let herself be anything less than fully powerful right now. David was quiet for most of it. The kind of quiet that has texture. The kind of quiet that means someone is listening with their whole body. When she finished, he was still quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Is Ava okay?" "She's coloring," Claire said. "She told me that the saddest kind of wrong is when someone does something bad and can't see it." Another pause. "She said that." "She quoted your mother, accurately." David made a sound. "Put me on speaker. Let me talk to her." Claire lowered the phone. "Ava, baby, Dad wants to talk to you." Ava looked up from her coloring book, and her face did exactly what Claire expected it to do, which was light up completely. She dropped the crayon and grabbed the phone. "Daddy." "Hey, sunshine." David's voice through the speaker was warm and careful. "I heard something happened. You doing okay?" "I got pushed," Ava said with the directness of someone who sees no reason to soften a fact. "My hip hurts a little, but I'm okay. I told the lady your name." "You did?" "I told her you own the plane. She looked weird after that." "I bet she did." There was something in David's voice that wasn't quite amusement and wasn't quite anger, but was somewhere between the two, the voice of a man who is holding something tightly and deciding what to do with it. "You were very brave, sweetheart." "Mama was braver," Ava said simply, and looked at Claire. Claire pressed her lips together and breathed carefully through her nose. "Can I have Mama back for a second?" David asked. Ava handed the phone back without argument and picked up her crayon. Claire took the phone off speaker and held it to her ear. "Tell me her name," David said. "Jessica Hartwell." The silence that followed lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then David said, "Hartwell Capital." "That's what she said." "She mentioned her father." "By name?" "Yes." David was quiet again. And in that quiet, Claire could hear him thinking, could feel the particular weight of her husband processing a situation, sorting pieces, making connections. She had watched him do this in boardrooms and in their kitchen and in the car and in bed at 2 a.m. when something was bothering him, and he didn't want to say it out loud until he'd worked it through. "I know Richard Hartwell," David said. Claire had not expected this. "Not personally," he added quickly, "but professionally. We crossed paths at an industry event 3 years ago. He's been trying to break into the private aviation charter market. He reached out to our VP of partnerships about 6 months ago about a potential acquisition discussion." Claire absorbed this. "You're saying he wanted to buy your company?" "He wanted to talk about it. We declined to engage. And his daughter just shoved our child and called us an obstacle." "Yeah." His voice was flat now. Flat in the particular way that meant he was done processing and had arrived somewhere. "Claire, when you land, I need you to get Marcus to give you a full written account of everything before anyone leaves that plane. Whatever the passengers in the back recorded, get their contact information, and I'm going to make some calls. David, I'm not doing anything rash. I'm just making sure that we have everything documented before this woman has a chance to build a different version of the story." "She already started building it," Claire said. "She called it a bump. She said the aisle was narrow." "Of course she did." "And the people in the back," Claire said, "have it on video." David's breath came out slow and measured. Okay, that matters. That matters a lot. Claire, you stay calm, you keep Ava calm, and you do not engage with this woman again unless she comes to you. Let her sit over there and think about what she did. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing." "I have been doing nothing for the last 34 years, Claire said, "except when it's my daughter." "I know," David said. "I know. That's why you stood up, and I am proud of you for that. I need you to know that." She pressed her fingers against her closed eyes for just a moment. "I'm proud of Ava too," she said. "She told the woman I own the plane," David said. And now there was something in his voice that was undeniably, despite everything, close to a laugh. "At 6 years old. She did. She is her mother's daughter. Don't start with me, David. I love you. Call me when you've made your calls," she said, and she hung up. She put the phone face down in her lap. She looked out the window at nothing. The sky was that particular shade of pale that comes at altitude neither blue nor white, but something in between, something that doesn't have a good name, but that you know when you see it. Ava had gone back to coloring. She was working on a sun now, pressing the yellow crayon in slow circles, building up the color in layers. She did this, sometimes layered the colors, pressed and lifted and pressed again, building something up deliberately, patiently, making sure it was as bright as she needed it to be. Claire watched her and felt the strange, complicated thing she always felt when she looked at her daughter. The thing that was love and fear and pride and grief, all layered together like the colors in Ava's drawing built up carefully over time. Never simple, never just one thing. She became aware then that the cabin was not as quiet as she had thought. There was a voice, low, urgent, coming from the front. Jessica Hartwell was on her phone. She had turned toward the window and was speaking in a voice that was clearly intended to be private, but was not quite private enough, the voice of someone who is angry and trying not to be heard and is not succeeding at either. "Dad, I need you to listen to me. I need you to listen." A pause. I know, but this woman on the flight." Another pause longer. The silence on this end that meant someone on the other end was talking. "No, that's not what happened. That is not... Dad, will you let me finish?" Claire did not move. She kept her eyes forward. She breathed. Ava looked up from her coloring. She looked at the front of the cabin. She looked at her mother. Claire gave her the smallest shake of her head. "Not our business right now." Ava understood and looked back at her coloring book. "Her husband owns the plane," Jessica said into her phone, and her voice was tight and controlled, but there was something beneath it now, something that had not been there when she was standing in the aisle looking down at a 6-year-old. Something that sounded, if Claire was reading it correctly, and she thought she was like the early edges of fear. "David Brooks. Yes, I know who he is. "Dad, I need you to—" And then her voice dropped below the threshold of what Claire could make out, swallowed by the sound of the engines and the rest of whatever Jessica Hartwell was saying to her father at 30,000 feet in the air was lost. But Claire had heard enough. She had heard enough to know that Jessica Hartwell was scared. And the thing about fear, Claire knew the thing that was both its weakness and its danger, was that scared people rarely made better choices than they'd already made. Scared people made faster ones. They made bigger ones. They reached harder for control because the loss of it felt like the ground giving way. She thought about what David had said. She thought about Richard Hartwell wanting to buy the company and being told no. She thought about the way Jessica had said Hartwell Capital, the way you say a name that is supposed to protect you. She thought about people like you and Obstacle and the small sound Ava had made when she hit that armrest. And she thought about the couple in the back sitting quietly, phones in hand, recording everything. The world was watching. It just didn't know it yet. The plane flew on through that pale sky, carrying all of them forward, and Claire Brooks sat across from her daughter and felt the thing she had learned to feel in every moment that asked more of her than seemed fair. She felt it, and she held it, and she did not let it go, because they were not done, not even close. Jessica Hartwell had gone quiet. That was the thing Claire noticed first when she pulled her attention back to the front of the cabin. The phone call had ended. The low, urgent voice had stopped, and now Jessica was sitting in her seat with the particular stillness of someone who has just received information that required them to recalibrate everything. Claire did not know what Richard Hartwell had said to his daughter. She did not know whether he had been angry or calculating or cold. She did not know whether he had told her to apologize or to hold her ground or to say nothing at all. What she knew was that the woman who had boarded this plane with the confidence of someone who had never once been told no was now sitting 2 rows ahead of her and radiating something she had not been radiating before. Uncertainty. And uncertainty in a person who is not accustomed to it is a volatile thing. Ava had finished her son and moved on to what appeared to be a horse, though Claire would not have identified it as such without context. She was pressing hard with a brown crayon, her tongue just barely visible at the corner of her mouth, the way it always was when she was concentrating. She had stopped tracking the front of the cabin. She had decided in the way children decide things to file the situation away and return to the business of being 6 years old. Claire wished she could do the same. She picked up her own phone and opened her messages. David had not called back yet. She had not expected him to so quickly. She knew what making calls meant for David. It meant he was moving through his network the way he always moved through it, quietly and methodically, pulling threads, testing connections, building a picture. He had built a company on that skill. He had walked into rooms where no one expected him to succeed, and he had succeeded anyway, not by being louder than everyone else, but by being more prepared. Claire had watched him do it for 11 years. She trusted the process, even when the waiting was hard. She put her phone back in her bag. That was when Marcus appeared at her side again. He crouched slightly, keeping his voice low. "Mrs. Brooks, I want to let you know that I've completed my incident report. It's time-stamped and logged into our system. Your husband's operations team will have access to it automatically because it's his aircraft." He paused. "I also want to tell you personally that what I observed was unambiguous. I was positioned at the forward galley when the contact occurred. I had a clear line of sight. What I saw was not an accident." Claire looked at him. "Thank you for saying that." "I also want you to know," he said, and here something shifted in his professional composure. "Not much a hairline crack, but enough that I've been working this route for 4 years, and I've seen a lot of people board this aircraft. Your family has always treated this crew with more consideration than most people treat their own staff. I just want you to know that it doesn't go unnoticed." Claire felt something tighten in her throat. She nodded once carefully. "That means a great deal, Marcus. Thank you." He straightened and returned to the galley. Claire pressed her fingers against the back of her other hand and breathed. She was not going to cry on this plane. She had made that decision approximately 45 minutes ago, and she was sticking to it. From the front of the cabin, she heard movement. Jessica Hartwell was standing up again. Claire went still. Every nerve in her body went on alert, in that particular way that happens when you have been in a conflict that has not resolved and you sense it reactivating. She watched without appearing to watch, the way she had learned to do, peripheral awareness, steady face, full attention underneath. Jessica did not walk toward the back this time. She walked to the galley and she spoke to Marcus, and Claire could not hear everything, but she could hear the tone, and the tone was different from before. The entitlement had contracted. What remained was something more careful, more measured. A person who has been told by someone they respect that they need to fix something and is now figuring out how to do that in a way that costs them as little as possible. Marcus listened. He responded. His voice was professionally neutral. And then Jessica turned around and walked down the aisle, and this time she stopped in front of Claire. Claire looked up at her. Jessica had her arms crossed loosely across her chest, not defensively, or trying not to look defensive, which amounted to the same thing. Her expression had the particular tightness of someone who is doing something they don't want to do and has decided that the only way through it is to do it fast. "I want to speak to your daughter," she said. Claire held her gaze for a moment. "Why?" "Because I want to apologize to her." The words landed in the cabin, and Claire heard the couple in the back shift in their seats. She felt Ava look up from her coloring book. She did not look at Ava yet. She kept her eyes on Jessica. "You want to apologize?" Claire said. "Yes." "What changed?" Jessica's jaw moved. "I thought about what I said, and how I said it. That's not what I asked." Another pause. Jessica's eyes moved briefly away and then back. "My father called me back." Claire let the silence sit for a moment. She let it do its work. Then she turned to Ava. "Ava, this lady has something she wants to say to you." Ava put down her crayon very deliberately. She looked at Jessica with the clear, assessing gaze of someone who had been paying attention to everything and had formed opinions. "Okay," she said. Jessica looked at the child. And something happened in that moment, something Claire had not entirely anticipated. Something in Jessica's face changed when she actually looked at Ava. Really looked at her, the yellow dress, and the big puffs, and the coloring book, and the bruise Claire knew was on her hip under the fabric. Something shifted that was more than calculation. It was smaller and less comfortable than that. "I'm sorry," Jessica said, "for pushing you. I shouldn't have done that, and I shouldn't have said what I said." Ava regarded her for a moment. Then she said, "Which part?" Jessica blinked. "I'm sorry." "Which part are you sorry for?" Ava said. "The pushing part, or the obstacle part, or the people like you part?" The cabin was very quiet. Jessica opened her mouth, closed it. Something moved across her face that Claire had not seen there before. Not the polished management of emotion she'd been watching all flight. Something raw, something that looked, if Claire was being honest with herself, like the beginning of actual shame. "All of it," Jessica said finally. "I'm sorry for all of it." Ava considered this. She picked up her crayon. She looked at her drawing, then she looked back up. "My grandma says sorry is just a word unless you change what you do next," Ava said. "So I'll think about it." And she went back to coloring. Claire looked at her daughter and felt the specific, overwhelming, inarticulate love that comes from watching your child be more graceful than you were at their age, or quite possibly any age since. She pressed her lips together and said nothing. Jessica stood there for another second, and in that second, she looked like a woman who had expected an easy absolution and had received instead something far more honest and far more difficult to carry. Then she turned and walked back to her seat. Claire heard the man in the back section say something quiet to his wife. His wife made a short sound of agreement. The phone, Claire noticed, was no longer pointed toward the front of the cabin. It was face down on the fold-out tray. Whatever they had captured, they had captured. Claire's phone buzzed. She looked at it. "David." She answered immediately. "Hey." "Okay," David said. He had his, "This is what we're doing" voice on the one that meant he had moved from processing to action. I spoke to Tom. Tom was Thomas Reeves, David's general counsel, the man who had been with the company since year 2 and who David once described as the most useful person he had ever met because he was the only human being David knew who could outline legal strategy and remain completely emotionally detached at the same time. "What did Tom say?" Claire asked. "He said to make sure we have everything documented before she deplanes. Marcus has the incident report. Do the passengers have video?" "I believe so." "I'm going to need to reach out to them directly. Can you get their names?" "I can ask Marcus." "Do that. And Claire, I need you to know something." His voice changed, dropped a register. "Richard Hartwell reached out to me." Claire's hand tightened on the phone. "When 20 minutes ago, he called my personal cell." "How does he have your personal cell?" "He has had it since the acquisition conversation 6 months ago. I never bothered to change it." A pause. "He was very smooth about it. He called to, and I quote, personally extend his regrets about what he described as a misunderstanding involving our families aboard a charter flight." "He called it a misunderstanding." "He called it a misunderstanding." Claire looked at the back of Jessica's seat. "What did you say?" "I told him that his daughter physically shoved our 6-year-old daughter, used racially coded language in front of multiple witnesses, refused to apologize until apparently someone made her understand what was at stake, and that calling it a misunderstanding was not a framing I was prepared to accept." Claire closed her eyes for 1 second. "David, I was polite about it. Were you? I was precise about it. There's a difference." She could hear him moving the sound of footsteps a door. He'd gone somewhere private. "Claire here is what I know about Richard Hartwell. He is a man who has spent 40 years using his name to solve problems. He called me because he is already thinking about this from a containment perspective. He does not call the husband of a woman his daughter just insulted to offer personal regrets unless he is worried about what comes next." "And what comes next?" Claire asked. "That depends on what you want." She had been thinking about this. She had been thinking about it since she hung up with him 40 minutes ago, in between watching Ava color and listening to Jessica's phone call and watching Marcus write his report. She had been turning it over, feeling the edges of it, trying to understand what shape she wanted it to be. "I want accountability," she said. "Real accountability. Not a phone call from a father smoothing things over. Not a half apology delivered to a child because someone finally explained the stakes. I want the whole thing visible. I want people to see what happened and what it means." David was quiet for a moment. "You know what that means." "I know what it means. It means it goes public. It means our names are in it. It means Ava's name is in it." "I know." She took a breath. "But that video exists whether we control it or not. Those 2 passengers already have it. Someone is going to post it. And if it comes out without our voice attached to it, it becomes a story about a conflict on a plane. If we shape the narrative, it becomes what it actually is." David said nothing for a long moment. Then, "Let me call Tom back." "Call Tom back. And Claire, when you land, do not get off that plane until I tell you to. I'm going to have someone from our operations team at the gate, and I want Jessica Hartwell to understand that the moment she steps off that aircraft, she steps off it into a situation she is not fully prepared for." Claire sat with that for a moment. "David, I don't want this to be about revenge." "It's not revenge," he said. "It's consequence. There's a difference. And that difference matters." She knew he was right. She also knew that the difference in practice sometimes felt thinner than you wanted it to. "I'll wait for your call," she said. She hung up. Ava had been listening, not obviously, not in a way that interrupted her coloring, but children always listen. You have to remember that. They are always listening, even when they seem not to be. Especially when they seem not to be storing things away, building their understanding of the world from the fragments of adult conversation that drift past them when grown-ups forget to guard their words. "Is Daddy mad?" Ava asked without looking up. "Daddy is handling things," Claire said. "Is he mad, though?" Claire looked at her daughter. "He is very calm," she said. which is sometimes the same as mad, just better organized. Ava processed this. Like you. Like me. Ava went back to her horse. She added what appeared to be a tail, which improved its recognizability considerably. The plane had been in the air for a little over 2 hours. They were somewhere over the middle of the country, that vast stretch of land that always looked from this altitude like a map of itself, ordered and abstract and enormous. Claire had another 2 hours to sit with everything that was moving and everything that was building and everything she had said and decided and could not now unsay or undecide. From the front of the cabin came a sound. She did not immediately understand what the sound was. It took her a moment to place it. And when she placed it, she felt a chill move through her that had nothing to do with the cabin temperature. Jessica Hartwell was crying, not loudly, not dramatically. She had turned toward the window, and she was crying in the quiet, pressed-in way of someone who is trying very hard not to be heard, the kind of crying that comes not from performance, but from something actually breaking some private interior thing that has been holding under pressure and has finally given way. Claire sat with this information. She sat with the complicated thing it made her feel, which was not satisfaction exactly, and not sympathy exactly, but something in between, something she did not have a clean name for. She thought about what it meant to cry on a plane after doing what Jessica had done. She thought about whether the tears were for Ava, or for the situation, or for the version of the story Jessica had told herself all her life that was currently showing its cracks. She did not know. She could not know. She was not inside that woman's life. What she knew was her own. She reached over and put her hand on Ava's knee. Ava looked up. "How's the horse?" Claire asked. Ava turned the book to show her. The horse now had a mane. It was orange. "Beautiful," Claire said. Ava smiled. It was the full smile, the one that took over her whole face, the one that had been there since the day she was born, and had never once in 6 years been anything other than completely and unguardedly genuine. Claire held on to that smile. She held on to it the way you hold on to something when you're not sure what's coming and you need to know exactly what you're protecting. Her phone buzzed again. Not David this time, a number she didn't recognize. She frowned at it, almost let it go to voicemail, then something made her answer. "Hello?" "Mrs. Brooks." A woman's voice. Professional. Careful. "My name is Sandra Chen. I'm a producer with the Meridian News Network. I'm calling because we've been sent a clip of an incident aboard a private charter flight, and I believe you and your daughter are involved. I wanted to reach you before we made any editorial decisions. Do you have a moment to talk?" Claire looked at the back of Jessica's seat. The video was already out. Someone had already sent it. The story was already moving. She took one slow breath, closed her eyes for just a second, and then she opened them and said in the clearest, most grounded voice she could find, "Yes, I have a moment. Tell me what you have." Because this was the part where it stopped being just about one plane and one woman and one child in a yellow dress. This was the part where the world leaned in. And Claire Brooks had spent her entire life preparing for a moment like this, without knowing she was doing it, building toward clarity and steadiness, and the kind of voice that does not waver when everything else is shaking. She was ready. Sandra Chen's voice on the other end of the line was the kind of professional that comes from years of asking hard questions and knowing exactly when to go quiet and let the other person fill the silence. She was good at her job. Claire could tell that immediately. She could tell it the way you can tell when someone is actually listening versus waiting for their turn to talk. "What we have," Sandra said, "is approximately 4 minutes and 17 seconds of footage taken aboard what appears to be a private aircraft. It shows a woman making physical contact with a young child followed by a verbal confrontation. The audio is clear enough that several statements are audible. I'm not going to read them to you because I think you already know what's in it." "I do," Claire said. "The footage was sent to us by a viewer through our tip line approximately 35 minutes ago. We've been trying to verify it before we do anything with it, which is why I'm calling you directly rather than running it." Claire appreciated that. She filed it away. "Who sent it? I can't share that, but I will tell you that it came in with a significant amount of context attached. Names, details, the name of the aircraft owner." A pause. "Your husband's name." Claire looked at Ava, who had moved on from the horse and was now drawing what appeared to be a very ambitious rainbow. "I'm listening," Claire said. "Mrs. Brooks, I want to be transparent with you. This footage, if we verify it and run it, will move very fast. The statements in it are the kind of statements that people respond to strongly. I don't want to contact you after the fact when you've had no chance to be part of the conversation. That's not how I want to operate." "I appreciate that," Claire said. And she did. She also understood that Sandra Chen was not calling purely out of kindness. She was calling because having Claire on record, having Claire's voice attached to the story, made it stronger. She understood how this worked. She was not naive about it. But understanding it didn't make it wrong. It just made it real. "Can I ask you some questions?" Sandra said. "You can ask," Claire said. "I'll tell you what I'm able to tell you. Is the child in the video your daughter?" "Yes." "How old is she?" 6. "And the woman who makes contact with her, do you know who she is?" Claire paused. She looked at the back of Jessica Hartwell's seat. Jessica had stopped crying. She was sitting upright again, spine straight, facing forward, the practiced posture of someone who has decided that composure is the only territory left to hold. "I know who she is," Claire said. Sandra waited. Claire did not fill the silence, and Sandra, recognizing a person who would not be led, moved forward. "Mrs. Brooks, is there anything you want to tell me in your own words about what happened on that plane today?" Claire thought about David. She thought about Tom Reeves. She thought about the fact that she was still in the air, still on the plane, that this was all still in motion, and nothing had landed yet in more ways than one. She thought about what David had said, real accountability, shaping the narrative. She thought about Ava saying sorry is just a word unless you change what you do next. "I'm going to give you a statement," Claire said, "but I need 20 minutes. I'm still in the air and I need to speak to my husband before I say anything on record. Can you give me 20 minutes? "I can give you 20 minutes, Sandra said. "But Mrs. Brooks, I have to be honest with you. Other outlets may already have this footage. I reached you first because we verify before we run. Not everyone operates that way." "I understand," Claire said. 20 minutes. "I'll call you back on this number." She hung up. She called David immediately. He picked up before the first ring finished. "I was about to call you," he said. "A producer from Meridian already has the footage," Claire said. "She called me directly. She's holding before running it, but she's telling me other outlets may have it too." David said one word that was not suitable for print, and then went quiet for 2 seconds. Okay, Tom anticipated this. He said if the footage moves before we're ready, then we get ahead of it instead of behind it. "Claire, I need you to decide right now. Are we talking or are we not talking?" "We're talking," Claire said. "But we do it our way, on our terms. I am not giving Meridian the first interview. I'm giving them a statement, and I control the statement." "What do you want the statement to say?" She had been composing it in her head since Sandra Chen said hello. "It says that our daughter was physically shoved by a fellow passenger on a family-owned aircraft. It says that the passenger refused to apologize and made statements that were discriminatory in nature, directed at both our daughter and myself. It says that we have full documentation of the incident, including crew reports and multiple passenger accounts. It says that we believe in accountability, and that accountability should apply equally, regardless of what your last name is or how much money your father has." David was quiet for a moment. "That last part. I want that last part in. It's going to be read as a direct reference to Richard Hartwell." "Good," Claire said. "It is a direct reference to Richard Hartwell." Another pause. Then, "Tom is going to tell me that's aggressive." "Tom is not the one who was on this plane." "No," David said quietly. "He's not." She heard him breathe out. "Okay, say it. Say all of it." "And Claire, I need you to know that whatever comes from this, I am with you, every single step of it." "I know," she said. "Call your operations team. I want someone at that gate." "Already done. Marcus has been briefed. The moment you're on the ground, nobody deplanes without protocol. I've also asked Marcus to formally request that Ms. Hartwell remain aboard for a moment at the end of the flight for a conversation with our ground team." "Can he do that?" "It's our aircraft," David said. He can do a great many things. She had not thought about it that way. It was strange the way ownership worked, the way it translated into language and authority, and the ability to make requests that sounded like requests but weren't really. She had spent years watching David navigate those waters. She had watched him learn them and master them, and occasionally be made uncomfortable by them, in the way that good people are sometimes made uncomfortable by power, even power they have earned. Okay, she said. I'll call Sandra Chen back. I'll be there when you land, David said. I moved my meeting. David, you didn't have to. I know I didn't have to. His voice was firm and warm in equal measure. I wanted to. You and Ava are not walking off that plane without me there. That is not a negotiation. She pressed her lips together. Okay. Tell Ava I love her. Tell her yourself, Claire said. You'll be there in a few hours. She heard something in his voice that was close to a smile. Fair enough. Call the producer. She hung up. She looked at her phone for exactly 3 seconds, gathering herself the way she always gathered herself from the inside out, layer by layer, the composure she had built over a lifetime, coming up now when she needed it most. Then she called Sandra Chen back. The statement took 8 minutes to give. Claire gave it clearly and completely, without embellishment and without minimizing. She spoke about Ava the way a mother speaks about her child when she has decided that the world needs to understand what it means to put your hands on someone's baby. She spoke about the language used, the words people like you, the word obstacle. She spoke about discrimination and about the way certain words land differently depending on who is saying them and who is hearing them and what history lives between those two things. She was specific. She was calm. She was devastating. When she finished, Sandra Chen was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Mrs. Brooks, I want to play you something. Claire frowned. Play me something? The person who sent us the footage also sent us a second clip. Shorter. I want to know if you recognize the voice. There was a brief pause, the sound of something being queued up, and then Claire heard it through the phone. A woman's voice, Jessica's voice, but not from the confrontation in the aisle. This was different. This was the phone call. The one Jessica had made to her father after Ava said what she said. Whoever in that back section had been recording had not stopped recording when the confrontation in the aisle ended. The clip was 37 seconds long. In those 37 seconds, Jessica said several things, the most significant of which was this: Dad, I need you to fix this. I don't care what you have to do. Call whoever you need to call. I am not letting some woman on a charter flight make this into something it isn't. Claire sat very still. She listened to the whole thing. Then she said, Yes, I recognize the voice. Is that the same woman? Yes. Sandra Chen let out a careful breath. Mrs. Brooks, I'm going to be completely honest with you. This changes the nature of what we're looking at here. What started as a confrontation clip is now also evidence of an attempt to manage a narrative. That's a different story. How different? Claire asked. The kind of different that makes front pages, Sandra said. Claire looked out the window at nothing. The pale sky, the altitude, the enormous, indifferent beauty of the world from 30,000 feet. Run it, Claire said. All of it. The statement, the footage, the second clip. Run it the way it happened. Are you certain? I'm certain. After she hung up, she sat in the kind of stillness that comes after a decision you cannot take back. She felt the weight of it. She felt the rightness of it and the cost of it at the same time, and she let herself feel both because she had learned that pretending one of them wasn't there didn't make it go away. Ava had fallen asleep, somewhere in the last 20 minutes, curled against the armrest with her head tipped sideways and her coloring book open on the seat beside her. Ava had simply closed her eyes and gone to sleep the way children do, completely without negotiation, the way adults no longer can. Her mouth was slightly open. She was still holding the orange crayon loosely in one hand. Claire looked at her daughter sleeping and felt it again, the thing that had no clean name. The love that was also fear, the pride that was also grief, the specific weight of raising a black girl in America and knowing that the world would ask more of her than it asked of others, and that she would rise to meet it because she was who she was, which was both everything Claire had prayed for and the thing that kept Claire awake at 3 a.m. more nights than she could count. She reached over and gently took the crayon from Ava's hand before it could roll onto the floor. She held it for a moment. Orange. Ava's second favorite color after yellow. From the front of the cabin came the sound of movement. Jessica had stood up again. This time, she did not come toward the back. She walked to the galley and she spoke to Marcus. And Claire watched the exchange from where she sat. Watched the body language. Watched Marcus's careful, neutral expression. Watched Jessica's hands, which were not still. She had one hand against the galley counter, and she was pressing it there the way you press something when you need something solid. Whatever Jessica said, Marcus responded to it with a brief nod and then said something back, and Jessica went very still. She came back to her seat slowly. She picked up her phone. She looked at it. She put it down. She picked it up again. She was doing something on it, typing something, the rapid, urgent typing of someone who is trying to manage something that is already beyond managing. Claire's own phone buzzed. Not a call this time. A text from a number she didn't recognize, which turned out when she read the message to be more alarming than a call would have been. The text said, "Mrs. Brooks, this is Richard Hartwell. I was hoping we might speak before this situation escalates further. I believe we can resolve this privately in a way that is fair to everyone. Please call me at your earliest convenience." Claire read it twice. Then she forwarded it to David with a single line of her own. "He has my number." David's response came back in under 90 seconds. "Tom says, don't call him. Don't respond at all." Silence is the strongest position you have right now. She understood that. She agreed with it. But she also felt the particular kind of anger that comes from being asked to manage quietly to be reasonable, to find a private solution to a public problem. She had been managing quietly for 34 years. She had been finding private solutions to public problems her whole life. She was not interested in doing it again. She put the phone back in her bag. 30 minutes passed. 40. Ava slept. Claire sat with her thoughts, which were moving fast now, cycling through what she had said and done, and what was already in motion and what would be waiting when they landed. She thought about Sandra Chen in a newsroom somewhere watching footage. She thought about Richard Hartwell at a desk somewhere making phone calls that were arriving too late to do what he intended them to do. She thought about David moving his meeting, getting in his car, driving toward the airport. Then Marcus appeared at her side and bent down. "Mrs. Brooks," he said quietly, "we've begun our descent. We'll be on the ground in approximately 40 minutes. I wanted to let you know that your husband's operations team has confirmed 2 representatives at the gate, and per Mr. Brooks's instructions, I will be making a general announcement when we land, asking all passengers to remain aboard briefly. Standard language departure processing, nothing alarming." He paused. "I also want to tell you that Ms. Hartwell has asked me twice in the last 20 minutes whether she can deplane before the other passengers." Claire looked at him. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that all passengers would be deplaning together and that if she had an urgent connection to make, she was welcome to discuss it with the ground team on arrival." He kept his voice utterly neutral. "She did not have a connection to make. She is on the same flight plan as you." Claire nodded slowly. "Thank you, Marcus." He returned to the front. Claire looked at the back of Jessica's seat and thought about what 40 minutes feels like when you know what's waiting at the end of them. She thought about the way fear works on a person who is not used to it, the way it accelerates, the way it makes small spaces smaller. Jessica Hartwell had boarded this plane this morning as the most powerful person on it. Or so she had believed. She was now discovering that power is not always what it appears to be from the inside. Ava stirred. She blinked, looked at Claire, looked around the cabin, and then looked at the window with the immediate and genuine excitement of a 6-year-old who has just woken up from a nap on a plane and realized they are descending. "Are we landing?" she asked, voice thick with sleep. "Almost," Claire said. Ava pressed her face against the window. Then she pulled back. "Mama, there are buildings." "That's Los Angeles." "It's big." "It is." Ava considered the city spreading out beneath them with the same assessing gaze she had turned on Jessica Hartwell 2 hours earlier. Then she turned to Claire. Is Daddy going to be there? Yes, Claire said. Daddy is going to be there. Ava's face did the thing it did when she heard something that made her feel completely safe. Something settled in it. Something that had been just barely held released. Good, she said, and she looked back out the window. Claire put her hand on her daughter's back. She felt her breathe. The plane dropped lower through the sky. Los Angeles growing beneath them, sprawling and enormous and indifferent, in the way that cities are full of people who did not know what had happened on this flight today and would within a matter of hours know it completely. The story was out. It was moving. There was no pulling it back, and in 37 minutes this plane was going to land. And when it did everything that had started in that narrow aisle over a small girl in a yellow dress, was going to step off the plane with them and into the daylight. Claire Brooks was ready for the daylight. She had always been ready for the daylight. It was the dark she had spent her life learning to survive. The wheels touched down at Van Nuys Airport at 12 minutes past 2 in the afternoon, and the sound of the runway under the aircraft was the most grounding thing Claire had felt in 4.5 hours. She felt it in her chest. She felt it the way you feel solid ground after you have been suspended in uncertainty for too long, that specific relief that has nothing to do with comfort and everything to do with arrival. Ava felt it too. She pressed both hands flat against the armrest and said, "We're here," with complete satisfaction, the way someone says something that they have been looking forward to for a long time. "We're here," Claire confirmed. Marcus made his announcement over the cabin speaker as the plane taxied smooth and professional, something about a brief ground processing hold and asking all passengers to remain seated until the crew gave the all clear. Standard language, nothing alarming. Exactly as he had told Claire he would do. From the front of the cabin, Claire heard Jessica Hartwell make a sound. It was not a word. It was the sound a person makes when they have been expecting something unpleasant and have just confirmed that it is actually coming. Claire did not look at her. She kept her eyes on Ava, who was already pulling Benny the stuffed rabbit out of her backpack because Benny needed to see Los Angeles. The plane came to a stop. The engines quieted, and in that quiet, the cabin felt very small. Marcus moved to the forward door. He spoke briefly to someone on the ground through the intercom. Then he came back down the aisle with the measured, deliberate walk of a man who is about to deliver information that has consequences. He stopped at Claire's row first. "Mrs. Brooks, your husband, is at the gate. He's asked me to let you know he's here and that you should take your time. There's no rush." Claire nodded. "Thank you." Marcus then turned and walked to Jessica's row. He stopped. He looked at her with his careful, professional expression and said in a voice quiet enough for the front of the cabin, but not quiet enough to be inaudible to Claire, "Miss Hartwell, there are 2 representatives from Brooks Aviation Ground Operations who would like to have a brief conversation with you before you deplane. It shouldn't take long." Jessica looked up at him. Her face had the particular tightness of someone who has been dreading a specific moment and has just watched it arrive. "Do I have a choice?" she said. Marcus paused. "You are always free to make your own decisions, Ms. Hartwell. However, the representatives are here on behalf of the aircraft owner, and declining to speak with them would be noted in the incident report as a refusal to cooperate with the owner's designated team." The word refusal landed the way Marcus intended it to land. Jessica turned her face toward the window. "Fine," she said. "Fine." The couple in the back section had been watching all of this. The man met Claire's eyes when she glanced back, and he gave her a single nod, the kind that means, "I saw everything, and I'm not going anywhere, and you have my support." His wife was already on her feet gathering her bag, but she paused and leaned across the aisle toward Claire. "I'm Patricia Okafor," she said quietly. "My husband is James. We're both willing to give statements, whatever you need." Claire looked at her. "You have no idea how much that means." Patricia put her hand briefly over Claire's and squeezed it once. Then she straightened up, and her husband stood beside her, and the 2 of them waited with the quiet patience of people who understand that being a witness is not a passive role. Claire helped Ava with her backpack. She checked that Benny was secure. She smoothed Ava's yellow dress, once the way mothers do the automatic gesture that is less about the dress and more about the need to do something with your hands when your heart is moving too fast. "Ready?" she asked. "Daddy's out there," Ava said, as though this answered the question completely, which it did. Claire stood. She shouldered her bag. She walked up the aisle of her husband's airplane, past the seat where Jessica Hartwell was sitting rigid and white-knuckled and silent, and she did not slow down, and she did not look at her, and she did not say a single word. She did not need to. Everything that needed to be said had been said at 30,000 feet, and what came next was no longer a conversation. It was a reckoning. David was standing at the gate. Claire saw him before she was fully through the door, which was the way it always worked with David. He had the specific quality of being visible in a crowd, not because he was the loudest person in it, but because he was the most still. He was tall and dark-suited, and he had his phone in his hand, but he was not looking at it. He was looking at the gate door. He was waiting. When he saw Claire, something in his face shifted, something that had been held released. And then he saw Ava behind her, and he crouched down on one knee right there in the middle of the terminal and opened his arms, and Ava ran. She ran the way she always ran, to her father, full commitment, no hesitation, Benny swinging from one hand, backpack bouncing, yellow dress flying. She hit him hard enough that he rocked back slightly, and he caught her and held her and buried his face in her hair, and Claire watched it and let herself feel every single thing she had been carefully, not fully feeling for the last 4.5 hours. She got to him 3 seconds later, and he stood up with Ava still in his arms, and he put his free arm around Claire and held both of them and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that the holding didn't say better. They stood like that for a long moment. Then Ava pulled back and looked at her father with great seriousness. "Daddy," she said, "the lady is still on the plane." David looked at Claire over Ava's head. Claire met his eyes. "I know, Sunshine," David said. "Some people from Daddy's team are talking to her. Is she in trouble?" David considered this with the care that the question deserved. She's going to have to think very hard about what she did today, and thinking hard is sometimes the most uncomfortable kind of trouble there is. Ava appeared to find this satisfactory. She laid her head on his shoulder and held Benny against her chest, and seemed for the first time in several hours to simply be a 6-year-old who had landed safely and was being held by her father. Claire watched the tension go out of her daughter's small body and felt it go out of her own in the same moment, like something unwinding that had been wound too tight for too long. David looked at Claire. "Tom is here. He's with the ground team, and there's something you need to know before we go any further." She read his face. "What happened?" "Meridian ran the story 18 minutes ago, both clips. Your statement, the footage, the second recording." He kept his voice low. "It's moving." "How fast?" "Very fast." He shifted Ava against his hip. "The phrase 'people like you' is trending. Your name is trending. Ava's name..." He paused. "I asked them not to use Ava's full name. They honored that. She's referred to as a minor throughout." Claire exhaled slowly. "And Richard Hartwell. His PR team issued a statement 12 minutes ago." David's jaw tightened slightly. "They called it a regrettable misunderstanding between 2 passengers aboard a private charter and expressed that the Hartwell family extends its sincere sympathies to all involved." Claire stared at him. Sincere sympathies. Sincere sympathies. The words were so inadequate for what they were attempting to cover that Claire almost laughed. She did not laugh. She stood there and felt the specific clarifying anger of a woman who has been offered a performance of regret instead of the real thing, and she let it sit in her body and tell her what she needed to know. "Where is Tom?" she asked. David nodded toward a door to the left of the gate area. "Conference room. He's with both ops representatives. He wants to speak with us before we decide on next steps." "Is there a next step beyond what's already in motion?" "There is," David said, "and it's significant." Something in his tone made her look at him more carefully. She knew his voice well enough to read the frequencies that didn't make it into words. What she heard in it now was not just concern and not just controlled anger. There was something else, something that felt like the particular seriousness of a man who has just learned something that changes the shape of everything. "What is it?" she said. "Let's get to Tom," he said. "I want you to hear it from him directly." Thomas Reeves was a compact, precise man in his early 50s who wore the same expression in every situation, the expression of someone who has already thought further ahead than everyone else in the room and is waiting patiently for the room to catch up. He was sitting at a small conference table with two Brooks Aviation representatives, both of whom stood when Claire and David entered. David set Ava down. Ava immediately occupied herself with her coloring book, which she had carried off the plane under one arm. Patricia and James Okafor had come with them and were seated to one side, quiet and present. Tom looked at Claire. "Mrs. Brooks, I want to start by saying that what you did on that flight today was exactly right. You stayed calm, you documented everything, you built a record. Everything I'm about to tell you is possible because of how you handled yourself." Claire sat down. "Tell me." Tom folded his hands on the table. "The second recording. The one captured during Miss Hartwell's phone call to her father. The one where she says she needs him to fix this and she doesn't care what he has to do." "I heard it," Claire said. "What you didn't hear," Tom said, "is what came after the clip. The person who recorded it kept recording. There are 12 additional seconds that were not included in what was sent to Meridian. Those 12 seconds were sent directly to us through our operations email by Mr. James Okafor." He glanced at James, who nodded once. "Those 12 seconds contain a statement from Jessica Hartwell that is, from a legal standpoint, considerably more significant than anything else said on that aircraft today." The room was very quiet. Claire looked at James Okafor. James leaned forward. When she said she needed her father to fix it, James said, his voice steady and measured. What came right after in those next 12 seconds was her saying, and I quote, "The last thing we need is this getting out when Dad is closing the Meridian acquisition." Nobody spoke. Claire heard the words. She turned them over, and then the full weight of them settled on her. "Richard Hartwell is acquiring Meridian News Network," she said. It was not a question. Tom nodded. "The deal has been in negotiation for 7 months. It has not been publicly announced. It was supposed to close in 48 days. Claire sat with this for a moment. She thought about Sandra Chen calling her. She thought about Sandra Chen saying, "I wanted to reach you before we made any editorial decisions." She thought about Meridian running the story 18 minutes ago, both clips, the statement, all of it, before Richard Hartwell's acquisition closed, before he had any ability to influence what they ran. "Sandra Chen knew," Claire said. "Sandra Chen may have known about the acquisition talks," Tom said carefully. "She ran the story anyway, which tells you something about Sandra Chen." David leaned back in his chair. "It also tells you something about why Richard Hartwell is currently having a very bad afternoon." And there it was, the thing David had heard, the thing that changed the shape of everything. This was never just about a woman on a plane who pushed a child. It was about power and who holds it, and what happens when someone who believes their power is invisible uses it carelessly in a room that turns out to have witnesses. Claire looked at Tom. "What are our legal options?" Tom began to speak, and he spoke for 6 minutes, and what he described was thorough and specific, and represented every option available to a family with documentation, multiple witnesses, video evidence, and a general counsel who had been thinking 3 steps ahead since the moment David called him. He talked about civil liability. He talked about the incident report. He talked about the Okafor's willingness to provide formal statements. He talked about what a formal complaint to the FAA looked like when a passenger makes physical contact with a minor aboard an aircraft. He talked about discrimination claims and what they require and what the evidence in this case did and did not support. When he finished, Claire asked one question. What does Jessica Hartwell face if we pursue all of it? Tom looked at her steadily. She faces a civil suit with strong evidentiary support. She faces a public record that includes her exact words on tape. She faces consequences that attach to her name permanently and professionally. He paused. She also faces the reality that the video is already public and already moving in ways that no legal process we initiate will accelerate or slow down. The court of public opinion is already in session, Mrs. Brooks. What we decide in this room determines the legal dimension of what happens next. The other dimension is already out of our hands. Claire looked at David. David looked at her. Between them, without a single word, they had the conversation they had been having for 11 years, the conversation that required no language because it was built from everything they knew about each other and everything they had chosen and everything they had built and protected and refused to give up. "We pursue it," Claire said. "All of it." Tom nodded and reached for his pen. It was at that moment that one of the operations representatives, a young woman named Keisha, who had been quiet throughout, looked at her phone and then looked up. "Mr. Brooks," she said, "Jessica Hartwell has left the aircraft." Everyone in the room went still. "I thought the ground team was with her," David said. They were. She told them she needed to call her attorney and asked for privacy for 5 minutes. When they checked at the 5-minute mark, she had deplaned through the secondary exit with her bag. "Ground crew is looking for her now." The room processed this in silence. Then James Okafor said very quietly, "She ran." The word "ran" hung in the air of that small conference room, and it said everything. It said that whatever Jessica Hartwell had been performing on that plane, whatever composure she had reconstructed after the apology and the crying and the rigid forward-facing silence of the descent underneath it, she had been calculating an exit. She had looked at the gate and seen David's operations team and made the decision that the fastest move was a lateral one. Claire felt something that was not quite satisfaction. It was closer to recognition. The recognition of a person who has been told she was making too much of something, who has been asked to accept a word misunderstanding in place of the truth. Watching the person who used that word choose flight over accountability. "Let her go," Claire said. David looked at her. "Claire?" "Let her go," Claire said again, and her voice was completely steady. "She ran." That is its own statement. There is no version of running from a ground team after shoving a 6-year-old child that reads as innocent. Let her go, and let that be part of the record too. Tom looked at her for a moment, and then something moved across his professionally neutral face. It might have been respect. "That's the right call," he said. "Pursuing her physically now creates a story about a chase. Letting her leave creates a story about a woman who chose to flee rather than face accountability. One of those stories serves you considerably better than the other." David sat back. He looked at his hands for a moment. Then he looked at Claire. "Okay." Ava had stopped coloring. She was looking at the adults around the table with her steady, clear gaze, reading the room, the way she always read rooms, filing things away for later building her understanding in layers. She looked at her mother. "Did the lady leave?" she asked. "She did," Claire said. Ava considered this. "Because she was scared." "Probably," Claire said. Ava looked at her coloring book. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm still going to think about whether I accept her sorry." Something in the room shifted. Patricia Okafor made a soft sound. Tom put down his pen. David pressed his lips together and looked at the ceiling for exactly 1 second. Claire reached over and put her hand over her daughter's. "You take all the time you need," she said. The next 4 hours moved fast and slow, at the same time the way consequential hours do. Tom made calls. The operations team filed the incident report with the appropriate aviation authority. James and Patricia Okafor gave formal recorded statements, both thorough and specific, both describing what they had seen with the clarity of two people who understood that their words were going to matter. Marcus, still aboard the aircraft, completing his own post-flight documentation, sent a formal written account to both Tom and Brooks Aviation's compliance team. It was 8 pages long. It was meticulous. It was the written record of a man who had understood, from the moment he saw what happened in that aisle, exactly what it meant and exactly what it would require. The story, meanwhile, had done what stories do when they carry the particular charge of something true and something recognized. It had moved. By the time Claire and David and Ava arrived at the hotel in West Hollywood, where they were staying for the long weekend, the phrase "people like you" had been used 412,000 times on social media, in combination with the name Hartwell. The second clip had been picked up by 17 additional outlets. 3 civil rights organizations had issued public statements. 2 of them named the incident as a textbook example of the entitlement and casual dehumanization that Black women and children encounter in spaces coded as belonging to a different class. Richard Hartwell's PR team issued a second statement. This one was longer than the first and used the words accountability and reflection and growth in close succession, which was a reliable signal that someone was paying a great deal of money for crisis management and the crisis was not being managed. The Meridian acquisition was put on hold, pending what the network's board described as a review of recent developments. Sandra Chen reported that story herself, which Claire suspected was not an accident. Claire read about all of this in the hotel that evening, after Ava had fallen asleep. Her small body curved under the white duvet, Benny tucked under her arm, the coloring book on the nightstand, with the orange crayons sitting in the middle of the open page. She read about it quietly on her phone, while David sat beside her reading the same things in silence, occasionally showing her something or receiving something from Tom, the 2 of them moving through the information together, the way they moved through everything side by side. At one point, David put his phone down and looked at Ava sleeping. "She told a woman at 30,000 feet that I own the plane," he said. "She did," Claire said. "She quoted my mother." "She did?" David was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about what Ava said, that sorry is just a word unless you change what you do next." He turned to look at Claire. "My mother said that to her. Apparently it came up. When?" Claire smiled slightly. "I don't know. You know how your mother is. She plants things." David looked at his daughter. The look on his face was one Claire had seen before in hospital rooms and birthday mornings, and once at a school play where Ava had forgotten all her lines and improvised an entirely different speech that was arguably better than the original. It was the look of a man who has been ambushed by love and does not mind at all. "She's going to be something," he said quietly. "She already is something," Claire said. He reached over and took her hand. They sat like that for a while in the quiet of the room, with the city outside, and the story still moving through the world like a current they had put into motion, and could not now stop carrying everything with it, the footage and the words and the second clip and the statement and the running and all of it. All of the true, unbothered record of what one woman had done to a child in a yellow dress, and what that child's mother had refused to let disappear into silence. 3 weeks later, Jessica Hartwell issued a personal public statement. It was different from the ones her father's PR team had written. It was shorter. It was written, Claire suspected, in Jessica's own voice, or something closer to it. It said that she had behaved in a way that was indefensible. It did not use the word misunderstanding. It did not use the word regrettable. It said that she had said things she could not take back and done something she could not undo, and that the work of understanding why she was capable of those things was hers alone to do, and that no statement was adequate to it, but that silence was worse. Claire read it once. She read it carefully. She sat with it for a long time. Then she put her phone down and went to find Ava, who was in the backyard, with her grandmother David's mother sitting at the garden table, with the coloring book open between them, while David's mother told her something with great seriousness that made Ava nod along with enormous concentration, storing it away. Claire stood in the doorway and watched them. She thought about everything that had started on a plane, and everything it had grown into, and everything it had cost, and everything it had proved. She thought about power, which is not always what it appears to be from the inside, and accountability, which is not revenge, but sometimes feels like it from the outside, and the difference between a word and what you do next. She thought about her daughter at 6 years old, standing in the aisle of a plane at 30,000 feet, with a coloring book against her chest, looking a woman in the eye and saying what was true. The world had heard it. The world had responded. And no amount of crisis management or acquisition reviews or carefully worded statements would put that moment back in the box it had come from. Because the truth once spoken clearly by someone who has no reason to say anything other than the truth does not need management. It does not need a PR team. It does not need to be louder than everything else in the room. It just needs to be said. And Ava had said it, and Claire had stood behind it. And that was something that belonged to them now completely and permanently in a way that no one on earth had the power to take away.